I realized there has not been an episode of DOS games yet for this season, so I figured we might as well end the season with one. This episode will bounce back and forth all over the 1990s, and I suppose 1998 is as good a time frame to start as any, so here's Quadnet from Brainchild Design. And what we've got here is an endless shooter that takes place inside a square area that looks like a net, hence Quadnet. You control a generic-looking spaceship with 4 keys and shoot in 4 different directions using 4 other keys, sort of similarly to how Smash TV plays if you're familiar with that one, except this game happens entirely in this one screen. The game merely progresses in a seamless manner until you can't stand it any longer, throwing increasingly tougher enemies at you in a surprisingly natural, gradual manner. As with any classic arcade game, the only goal of the game is to get a high score. For me, this was the shooter game to end all shooter games. Quadnet is just so masterfully executed and has nothing like extra weapons or obstacles to dodge or anything of that sort to take your focus away from the relentless blasting and surviving. I probably spent at least a good 10 hours total with this game in my life, which is quite a bit considering the amount of time a single game usually takes, which I would say ranges from 3 to 4 minutes on a good day. I guess it's also rather telling that Quadnet is usually one of the first games I install on a new DOSbox virtual hard drive if I need to get a new PC. It's freeware and available in many places all over the net, so it's easily recommendable. Next, we have a game that I cannot in all honesty say that I have played since the brief stint of a couple of weeks. I played this game with a friend of mine around 1998 to 99 maybe, but Offensive from Motion Software 1996 is a rare case of a real-time strategy game that I have many times wanted to go back to because I liked its atmosphere and playing style more than I did in any other RTS. And remember, these were the days when games like Warcraft, Starcraft, and the Command & Conquer series ruled the PC gaming arena. Added to that, Offensive was one of the last games I ever saw and played from Motion Software, who around this time were merging with Infogrames. Playing Offensive now for the first time properly in quarter of a century, the nostalgia factor is immense here. As it has been said, Offensive is not the most strategic of strategy games, nor does it offer enough of action to suit fans of cannon fodder perhaps, but what Offensive has that makes it special is that you can play relatively accurate historic battles from the last 2 years of the Second World War, either as allies or Axis, and there are 20 battles to play altogether.
On the night of the 5th of June 1944, the British 6th Airborne Division parachuted into northern France to secure the Allied eastern flank.
For once, the isometric viewpoint doesn't bother me since you don't have to point a joystick into any direction, but the gameplay still isn't perfect by any means. Most of the game's problems have to do with AI, particularly your own troops' behavior, but there are ways to get around these inconveniences. Probably the greatest thing about Offensive is its astonishing variety of different kinds of units to control, and for its time, the terrain, the cities, and all kinds of details are impressive. All this is unfortunately not enough to take away the fact that it just doesn't play well enough, which is a great pity since the 20 given battles in this particular setting are absolutely worth looking into, since not that many RTSs give you that chance. Jeff Crammond's roller coaster racing masterpiece Stunt Car Racer does not represent a genre of racing games that would have been attempted to reimagine or remake since its original release. However, there are a couple of games that have taken some of its elements and successfully implemented them in considerably different environments. One such game is Gremlin Interactive's Fatal Racing from 1995, later released as Whiplash in North America by Interplay in 1996. In this little-known beast of a racer here, you get to drive even more roller coastery tracks than you do in Stunt Car Racer, since now you get to experience loops, corkscrews, and jumps on various kinds of tracks against much more than just one opponent. You can smash other cars too, so I suppose this could be considered a precursor to Carmageddon in a way.
Drivers ready! Engines ready! Go!
Perhaps it could be of some interest to some players that there are also various camera views in this game, making some of the more disorienting bits easier to handle if you so wish. Somehow I remember Fatal Racing being an excruciatingly fast racing game, but the speed of the game might have had something to do with the PC's hardware specifications at the time. It doesn't play quite as fast on my DOSbox, and I can't be bothered to find out the correct virtual PC build on PCem. Perhaps someday. SJ and I played this one a lot during the 1998-99 period, most likely on his PC, which had the better graphics card, but there were a few times we also played it using the IPX network option, similarly to how you would have played using a null modem cable back in the day, just link two PCs together with the cable. Nowadays, building that sort of a home network is just completely unnecessary and probably even impossible on modern PCs. So the only way to play a two-player mode in this one is split screen. Either way, it's very old school. It's time to get the most important platforming game series on the PC featured in my Nostalgia Trip games now. And how could it be anything other than Commander Keen from Apogee, created by id Software's Tom Hall, John Romero, and John and Adrian Carmack in 1990 and 1991 before they went 3D and changed the world of gaming for the rest of time. Although Doom was the game that properly opened my eyes to the possibilities that PCs had to offer in terms of gaming, I had actually played one or two different Commander Keen games a few times prior to that. I didn't realize until many years after playing Doom for the first time that the same people were responsible for both games. And what an impact Keen actually had on PC gaming. To an average Joe, the Commander Keen games might seem like nothing more than average platformers where you shoot and jump on various weird-looking aliens and collect score items and keys, although Keen's abilities on the pogo stick are not exactly common in platforming games. Or games of any kind, really. While all this is good and fun and brilliantly executed platforming in its own right, the game engine for the Commander Keen games was revolutionary, as this kind of scrolling had not been seen before 1990 on PCs. Carmack and Hall first tested the engine by creating the first level of Super Mario Bros. 3, replacing Mario with Dangerous Dave. The demo was sent to Nintendo, who were duly impressed, but it will come as no surprise to anyone that Nintendo wanted to keep their games exclusive. Sometime later, PC gamers got their closest Mario equivalent they could possibly have at the time with Commander Keen in Invasion of the Vorticons. The story is told in much more detail on David Kushner's fantastic book, Masters of Doom, How Two Guys Created an Empire and Transformed Pop Culture, published in 2004. Back in the day, and for a long time after the DOS gaming period, I used to think there were 6 or 7 Commander Keen games, when in reality there are actually only 3 official ones for the PC. The first 3 episodes are one game, and the first episode was the shareware episode, which would reel you in to purchase the full 3-episode game. And then there was a Keen 3.5 or Keen Dreams, released as a single full game, before the next full shareware game, again consisting of 3 episodes. The latter episodes look much more evolved and play somewhat better as well. I don't think I've ever actually completed more than maybe 2 or 3 of these episodes, though I keep getting back to them every now and then anyway. I can say that it's all solid and well-crafted platforming action that can keep you on your toes even now, and the Beeper soundtrack is just fantastically nostalgic. Our first of 2 Finnish games for today is not necessarily one of my personal favorites, although I did play Pro Pilkki a considerable amount back in the day, long before the sequel was made. If the internet is to be believed, and why shouldn't it, Pro Pilkki was the first ever ice fishing simulator, and all the world's ice fishing enthusiasts had to wait for one until 1999. Despite the year of publication, Pro Pilkki was built for DOS, so people with less modern computers would be able to play it. Also, it was released as freeware, so it gained popularity rather easily. The game is pretty simple to play, but difficult to master, just like ice fishing is in real life. You play fishing matches on a selection of 32 different bodies of water against a group of competitors and try to catch the most, or the biggest fish, in a given amount of time, and get to the weighing station before the time runs out. There are 11 different types of fish to catch, so you also need to utilize different kinds of lures and lines of different strength to the best of your abilities and occupy the right spots on each lake and whatnot to get the best results. The entire game can be played using a mouse as your controller, so in addition to the usual trial and error procedure that fishing entails, you also need to fine-tune your mouse handling to be able to expertly handle the ice fishing rod. Pro Pilkki is one of those unusual indie games that became so popular largely because people playing the game were not necessarily gamers as such. Even my now over 70-year-old uncle, for one, who has never been a video game fan himself, was a huge fan of the sequel and used to participate in online matches for a long time. But online competitions were also a thing in the original Pro Pilkki, making the considerable upgrade for the sequel muchly anticipated. Somehow, though, the original Pro Pilkki remains more nostalgic for me than the admittedly better sequel. Perhaps I'll mention that one in a Windows episode later on. In the mid-90s, there were a couple of excellent vertical shoot-'em-ups for DOS, which were played almost religiously for a period of time. This here is the latter one, Tyrian from Epic Mega Games 1995. The earlier game shall be included in the next DOS episode because firstly, Tyrian has a 2-player mode, and secondly, we already had an Apogee game here. Tyrian is a vertically scrolling sci-fi shooter that happens mostly on different planets, and occasionally in outer space, and is set about 19,000 years into the future. However, in my experience, shoot-'em-up games' time frame and locations are hardly ever worth mentioning when it's really the gameplay that interests the potential gamer. First of all, Tyrian is a long game, even in its original form, consisting of 3 episodes which were upgraded to 4 and later to 5 episodes in the 1999 release Tyrian 2000. Each episode lasts for quite a few lengthy levels and might take you through different routes to your destination, depending on how you react to the storyline cubes you collect. So it might take a while to get through the entire game, which is why the game was equipped with a save and load system. Of course, being a game in an episodic format, Tyrian was originally shareware, but became freeware in 2004, so there is no real obstacle for anyone to try the game out nowadays. Secondly, not only is your ship fully customizable with various kinds of main weapons for front and back, along with sidekicks and shields, but the game comes shipped with an editor where you can build your own spaceship. The weapon and shield upgrades can be purchased from money collected from destroyed enemies, so the only way to go about it is full blast. Happily, Tyrian is also stupendously playable, properly nice to look at, and has an absolutely fantastic soundtrack, coupled with house-shattering sound effects. In addition to the massive story mode, Tyrian also gives you a timed battle mode where you have a time limit to complete a mission, an arcade mode that can be played in a 2-player mode, which has its own little quirks up its sleeve, and a couple of hidden modes and a few minigames, some of which only became available in Tyrian 2000. For what seems at first glance a rather unassuming, if nice-looking shooter, Tyrian has a lot more to offer than what most others of its kind had thus far. While it's definitely highly nostalgic for me, since I played Tyrian for the first time before I had my own first PC, it holds up perfectly well in its own league even today. Now I have to bring up a game I don't have very fond memories of, even though I would have liked to enjoy it. As it happens, Test Drive 3: The Passion was for the longest time one of those games that I had no way of playing as it was supposed to be played. Even the first time I played it on a 486 based PC, it was too quick. Later, when slowdown programs like Maslow came out, they made the game slightly more playable once you found a good setting for the game in question, but Test Drive 3 always kept me at a distance. Because it was released in 1990 and only for DOS, I had to wait until DOSbox was good enough to be able to test it out again, but it took me until PCem came to my knowledge a year or two ago to finally get to play the game at its proper speed. The problem was, of course, that instead of sprite-based graphics as were used in the first two games, TD3 now featured a combination of bitmapped and 3D filled polygon graphics, which were more clock sensitive. Combine that with more free roamable roads and completely new hazards that you had to dodge in lightning speed. For the longest time it could only be played on specific hardware, because you'd be constantly either crashing into things or pulled aside by the police for driving 800 miles per hour. The memories of my frustration and something of an obsessive need to play Test Drive 3 after having been a huge fan of the first two games do make this game nostalgic for me, if not in a particularly good way. Even with all of its then revolutionary elements, like the changeable radio stations, windscreen wipers, headlights, and varying weather and time of day, as well as new viewpoints, the downfall of Test Drive 3 always was that it appeared at the wrong time. But my obsession to try to play the game every now and then still remains, which I occasionally do, whenever time allows, and at least now I can do it with some success. Here's another game that I had to juggle between this one and another option. You might remember from my earlier Nostalgia Trip episodes how I enjoy games like Rogue, NetHack and Larn, and there were a couple of more action-based adventure games with ASCII graphics made for DOS that I enjoyed in my primary DOS gaming years. One of them is called ZZT, or ZD, which was actually a game creation system in addition to being an action-adventure game itself, and it was developed and published by Potomac Computer Systems in 1991, who later became Epic Mega Games. Okay, so it was either this or yet another Apogee game, which shall be mentioned in another episode. Anyway, ZD was created from the idea of making a game out of a text editor by the then unknown talent Tim Sweeney, who later became known for creating the Unreal Engine in 1998. The basic ZD game holds a fair amount of examples and instructional games to show you how to play the game and what you are able to do with it. Personally, I never tried creating anything with ZD, as I was always too easily dragged into the inbuilt games and finding more ZD content online. In its given form, ZD features various kinds of enemies that can be shot with bullets you need to collect, bombs you can explode, pathways you need to open by walking through them, keys to open doors which lead to other places, scrolls that you can read, other characters you can interact with, gems that increase health, torches that light up your immediate vicinity in dark areas, and there are even puzzles made out of boulders, sliders, pushers, or mazes that you need to solve in order to make progress. Compared to Rogue and NetHack, playing ZD has little to do with luck and more to do with your skills at using your given weapons and save files. ZZT is a game I always keep stored somewhere in one of my DOSbox folders, but rarely do get the inclination to actually play it. It is a supremely nostalgic game for me though, bringing back the latter half of the 90s for me like a time bomb, but sadly it's not one of those games that I remember to revisit often enough. Our second Finnish game is actually a series that was developed between 1997 and 2000 by Mikko Forsström, who released his games under the moniker Maso Software, upon which the series Maso Hockey Manager originally started as. Later on, the games would be released under his own name, and the most recent editions of the game would only be released as MHM something or other. All the games in the series are basically text-based. The first game, MHM 97, was based on, if not a straight modification of Fullström's earlier manager game called Ilkka Ojansivu Pro Hockey Manager, but MHM takes much more comical take on the idea. Once you get your strategies set up, the game is barely more than an enter-pressing simulator. Before starting the season though, you can adjust the level of your home arena and your coaches, rent a group of true fans to follow you around for a monthly payment, perform espionage and other little tricks, but the basic gameplay is pressing the enter key repeatedly until you notice something out of the ordinary in the main menu screen. You can also bet on the winners of each match if you want to take the chance of making some money on the side. MHM 99 is the first real MHM game where you can set up players in your team in preferred lines, scout for new players from a detailed list, fine-tune your strategies, all sorts of nice gameplay increasing things that actually make you perform actions between matches. This version of MHM is the one that we played the most in school during skip hours, so it's the most nostalgic for me. When MHM 2000 came along, apparently later than intended, it had become rather heavy in its build, even for a text-based game. Indeed, just to get the game going, you have a lot more actions you need to perform, including adjusting your levels of managerial characteristics, which might take a while to figure out how to pick the most optimal choices for your style of playing. Some say it's the best hockey management game of all time on any platform, but I had moved on to other things by the time this one came out, so it's not particularly nostalgic for me. Unfortunately, all of the MHM games are only available in Finnish, so it'll be practically impossible for any foreigner to play these games without any skills in the language, and even if you do have some skills, chances are that most of the silly jokes will go straight over your head. Oh well, at least I've mentioned the games now. Today's episode ends with one of my all-time favorite point-and-click adventure games, The Legend of Kyrandia, Book 1. It's the first game, well, obviously, in a trilogy of Kyrandia games developed by Westwood Studios, who are better known for their Eye of the Beholder series and real-time strategy games Dune and Command & Conquer, and published by Virgin Games in 1992.
Malcolm the Jester is broken free. He now controls the Kyra gem, source of all the magic in Kyrandia. Once a favorite of the court, he killed the king and seized the gem. Imprisoned by the royal mystics, Malcolm was held for 18 years. But now the mystic spell has slipped, and vengeful Malcolm enjoys free reign.
The Legend of Kyrandia starts off with the evil jester Malcolm having escaped Kyrandia's royal prison and turning the protagonist Brandon's grandfather Calac, leader of the kingdom's powerful mystics, into stone, and takes off to bring terror and destruction throughout the kingdom of Kyrandia. Brandon finds Calac's stony figure and is led to an adventure of magic, discovery, and justice.
What happened to you?
It's a beautiful game with fun dialogue and a simple interface that only requires you to interact with objects and hotspots in each screen, instead of trying out using different verbs for different things. Unlike in Sierra's and LucasArts' adventure games, you're only allowed to carry 10 items in your inventory, so you need to drop things occasionally and retrieve them later on. It does get a bit tiresome nearer to the end of this game, but for the most part it doesn't really get in the way.
Wow.
Similarly to other adventure games of its time, you get voice acting as an option to just text dialogue, which is rather well made here.
Perfect.
But if you don't like to have speech, you can go with text
Must
only.
be fixed now.
That is how I played this game back in the day and prefer it that way. But as I said, the voice acting isn't too bad in this one. I never played the other two games in the trilogy quite as much, since they both had something I wasn't quite as comfortable with as I was with the first game. The second one was almost as good,
That must be the amulet.
but I remember getting stuck in it at some point. And the third one felt like a completely different game, not just because you were playing as the antagonist in the series.
I'd like to find this Malcolm. How tough could he be?
But all three games have notched themselves into my memory quite solidly, and the first one most of all, since it's the only game in the trilogy that I actually completed.
Another big but no. I should plant one of these.
But of course, for any adventure game enthusiasts, the entire Legend of
Hello?
Kyrandia series
Anybody?
should be in your to-do
Boy,
list.
Darn. Randy. Darn.
May I help you?
He asked for me. Why would he visit you? What do you want, boy? Are you taking orders for cheese?